In the darkened alleys of London's East End, a shadow loomed, a spectre of death that would become a most notorious figure in criminal history. His name whispered in terror, Jack the Ripper. The year was 1888, and the city was about to witness a series of gruesome murders that would remain unsolved to this day. But what drove this mysterious killer to commit such heinous acts? Let's explore the chilling tale of Jack the Ripper and the murder of Martha Tabram and the Canonical Five. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work, the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work, and want to start again. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers, just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away, if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. In the late 19th century, London was a city of stark contrasts. Prosperity and poverty lived side by side, and nowhere was this more evident than in the Whitechapel district. It was here that a series of brutal murders began, targeting the most vulnerable, prostitutes, who had little to no protection from the dangers of the streets. The city was in fear, with every shadow potentially hiding a deadly predator. The poverty in Whitechapel, located in the East End of London, was oppressive, with many families struggling to afford necessities like food and clothing. Most residents were working class, employed in low-wage jobs, or no jobs at all. The economic hardship, coupled with the lack of social support, often led many to a life of crime and begging, and led many women to turn to prostitution as a means of survival. Prostitution during the Victorian Age was a wide-scale problem in Britain. The number of women prostituting during this time was staggeringly high, and the profession was fraught with dangers. These women, often referred to as fallen women, were largely unprotected and vulnerable to violence. The fear that gripped London was not just due to the brutal murders. Other fears and anxieties also plagued the city. The rapid social changes of the industrial age were believed to have given rise to an ever-increasing range of psychological disorders, including excessive fear. The fear of being strangled by violent thieves, tales of sewers infested with a squealing band of pigs, and the fear of living without a male provider were all part of the psyche of the 19th century Londoners. Amid this pervasive dread, the Whitechapel district would soon become the stage for a crime that would shake the community to its core. On August 7th, 1888, Martha Tabram's body was found bearing the horrific marks of a frenzied attack. 39 stab wounds from 2 different blades suggested a killer of extreme violence and a possible military connection. The lack of evidence and witnesses left the police baffled and the public terrified. Was this the work of a gang, or was there a lone killer stalking the streets of London? Martha Tabram, born Martha White in 1849, was a woman of the East End, living a life of hardship and struggle. Her marriage fell apart due to her excessive drinking, and she was left to fend for herself and her 2 children. She turned to prostitution and street hawking to survive, living in a doss house in nearby George Street. On the night of her murder, she was seen out with her friend Mary Ann Connolly, also known as Pearlie Paul. The discovery of Martha's body in the early hours of August 7th, 1888, sent shockwaves through the East End community. The brutality of the attack exhibited an unprecedented level of violence. Many of her vital organs had been punctured, and a deep wound had been inflicted to her breastbone. But this was just the beginning of a reign of terror. As the city reeled from Martha's murder, more bodies were discovered. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. These were the Canonical Five, women whose murders resembled the signature of a single, sadistic killer. Each victim was found with her throat cut, and most were horrifically mutilated, indicating a murder with anatomical knowledge, or at least a morbid curiosity, of the human body. The brutality of the murders escalated with each victim, each scene more macabre than the last. Annie Chapman, discovered on September 8, 1888, was found with her womb removed, a chilling trophy for the killer. This act of barbarity was not just a murder, it was a message, a grotesque signature left by a murderer growing increasingly confident in his craft. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the police surgeon who examined Chapman's remains, described the body as terribly mutilated, with the throat dissolved deeply. In his own words, Dr. Phillips detailed the gruesome scene. It appears that the abdomen had been entirely laid open, that the intestines severed from their mesenteric attachments had been lifted out of the body and placed by the shoulder of the corpse. Additionally, the post-mortem revealed that 2 brass rings had been shaken off from the victim's fingers, which were not found. Another thing that went missing was a portion of the victim's abdomen, including her uterus and portions of her bladder and vagina. Coroner Wayne Baxter, who was conducting the autopsy, believed that the injuries had been made by someone who had considerable anatomical skill and knowledge. There were no meaningless cuts. For instance, no mere slaughterer of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to the post-mortem room. The double event of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, killed mere hours apart on the night of September 30th, showed a killer growing bolder and more daring. Stride's body was found with a single cut to the throat, while Eddowes was savagely mutilated, her face disfigured, and her kidney removed. This escalation in violence suggested a killer reveling in his control and the fear he planted. The murder of Mary Jane Kelly on November 9, 1888, marked the peak of his gruesome series. Her body was discovered in her room at 13 Miller's Court, a scene of such carnage that it stunned the investigators. The room was a scene of terror. Kelly's body had been disemboweled, her flesh flayed, and her organs placed around the room with morbid precision. The Ripper was not just killing, he was performing a ritual of death, taunting the police, the public, and his victims with his gruesome handiwork. The psychological impact of these atrocities on the community was profound. The public's fear was palpable, with many afraid to venture out at night, and women in particular suffered the acute threat of becoming the next victim. The Ripper's presence felt everywhere, his shadow cast over every dimly lit street corner of Whitechapel. The police, despite their efforts, were met with dead ends and frustration. The lack of reliable evidence, the absence of modern forensic techniques, and the sheer audacity of the crimes left them grasping for answers in a city clamoring for justice. Inspector Joseph Helson, who was investigating the case, stated, "Not an atom of evidence can be obtained to connect any person with the crime." Despite the best efforts of the police, Jack the Ripper was never caught. Theories abounded, from doctors to butchers, from the aristocracy to the mentally ill. But none could provide the closure the city so desperately sought. The Ripper's identity and motives remained a grisly secret. Was he a madman, a social avenger, or something else entirely? The murders of Jack the Ripper left an unforgettable mark on London and the world. They highlighted the predicament of the poor and the dangers faced by women in Victorian society. They also gave rise to modern criminal investigation techniques, as police sought new methods to catch a killer who was seemingly always one step ahead. The story of Jack the Ripper is a tale of horror, mystery, and a city's struggle with its darkest fears. It's a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of justice. As we look back on the murders of Martha Tabram and the Canonical Five, we are left with more questions than answers. But one thing is certain, the shadow of Jack the Ripper still looms large over the streets of London. In the shadows of Setagaya, Tokyo, Japan, a story unfolds that's as chilling as it is unsolvable. On a night meant for peaceful dreams, the Miyazawa family's home became a scene of unthinkable horror. As with Jack the Ripper, this case defies every expectation. An average middle-class family beloved by their community found themselves the target of an inexplicable act of violence. The brutality of the crime scene tells a story of their terrifying final moments, raising more questions than answers. What makes the Setagaya mystery stand out is not just the tragic loss of lives, but the baffling array of clues left behind by the perpetrator. Despite fingerprints, DNA, and even the murder weapons found at the scene, the killer's identity remains a mystery, slipping through the cracks of justice. The killer didn't just flee, he lingered, leaving a trail that should have led to his capture. Yet, here we are, decades later, with the case still open. This isn't just about solving a crime, it's about reclaiming peace for the community of Setagaya. Before we uncover this unsolvable crime, we would like to ask you to show your support by subscribing to our channel and liking this video. As the year 2000 drew to a close, the Miyazawa family, like many others, looked forward to the promise of a new year and the joy of their upcoming New Year festivities. Mikio, 44, Yasuko, 41, and their children, 8-year-old daughter Nina and 6-year-old son Rei, cheerfully enjoyed the end of the holiday season, blissfully unaware of the sinister thread woven into their fate. As the family made memories, cherishing what would be their last moments together on December 30th, a chilling reality hovered over them. As the year was coming to an end, so too were their lives. The evening was uneventful, a typical night in the Miyazawa household nestled in the quiet district of Setagaya. The family's last known activities were ordinary, the simple pleasures of home life. But as they settled in, a hidden danger lurked in the shadows, one that would turn their peaceful place into a scene of unspeakable horror. On the morning of December 31st, 2000, Yasuko's mother, Haruko, visited the Miyazawa family home. Haruko, concerned after being unable to reach her daughter by phone, decided to check on the family in person. Upon entering the house using her own set of keys, she was confronted with a horrifying sight: the lifeless body of Mikio at the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor. In a state of shock and disbelief, she called out to the family, but was met with silence. As she raced up the stairs, the grim reality became even more apparent. Like Mikio, Yasuko and Nina were discovered stabbed to death, and their bodies positioned at the foot of the ladder leading to the loft. Last was young Rei, who had been strangled. The brutality of the scene was overwhelming, with the stab wounds on the females being more excessive than those inflicted on Mikio. It suggested a particular aggression towards them. As investigators arrived, the evidence began to paint a chilling picture. There were signs of a break-in. The second-story bathroom window, an unassuming entry point, had been breached. Inside, the aftermath of a violent struggle was evident. The killer had not only been merciless, but had also stayed in the home for hours after the murders, a brazen act that suggested a disturbing level of audacity and calm. He had used the family's computer, consumed food from their kitchen, and left behind an assortment of murder weapons: a kitchen knife and a sashimi knife, both from the Miyazawa's home, as well as a sash cord. It was as if the intruder had made themselves at home, which only added to the horror of the situation. The evidence was abundant: fingerprints, DNA, and even the clothes left behind by the killer. Yet this wealth of clues only added to the mystery, as they pointed to a young man of mixed heritage, with connections that spanned across the globe, from Japan to the sandy deserts near a US military base. As the Setagaya community reeled from the shock of the Miyazawa family's murder, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police sprang into action, marking the beginning of what would become one of Japan's most intensive investigations. The crime scene offered a trove of evidence. Forensic teams meticulously gathered DNA samples, lifted fingerprints, and collected the belongings left behind by the killer. Among the items were clothes, a sash cord used as a murder weapon, and a bag that did not belong to the family. The evidence seemed promising, yet the abundance of clues did not bring the swift justice many hoped for. After the murder, the killer's behavior inside the Miyazawa home was both mysterious and deeply unsettling, displaying a disturbing level of comfort. They not only lingered in the house, using the family's computer and consuming their food, but also showed a Goldilocks level of ease. They lingered after the crime, using the internet and even resting on the couch, showing a shocking disregard for their violent actions and a strange comfort at the scene. The evidence and the killer's behavior painted a picture of a crime that was both brutal and bizarre. The police faced not only the task of piecing together the evidence, but also of understanding the psyche of a murderer who defied typical patterns. As the investigation pressed on, the hope was that the killer's overconfidence would lead to their downfall. The investigation into the Setagaya family murder took a significant turn as forensic analysis began to reveal the possible origins of the killer. The DNA evidence collected was extensive and telling. Analysis indicated that the killer had mixed ancestry, with genetic markers pointing to both European and East Asian origin. This rare combination of genetic traits narrowed the field of potential suspects and suggested a unique background, potentially critical in identifying the perpetrator. As the police dug deeper into the case, various theories about the killer's identity and motives surfaced. Some speculated that the murderer might have been driven by economic desperation, targeting the Miyazawa family for financial gain. Others considered the possibility of misogyny or a personal vendetta as driving forces behind the brutal attacks. A startling clue emerged when sand from the killer's belongings was linked to Edwards Air Force Base in Nevada and the crime scene's proximity to Yokota Air Force Base, only 9.5 miles away. This clue spawned the American theory, asserting that the killer might be connected to the international, possibly American, community, or have access to these military bases. This theory added a new layer of complexity to the case, as it expanded the scope of the investigation beyond Japan's borders. The potential foreign military connection opened up many diplomatic and jurisdictional challenges, but also provided a crucial lead that could bring the police closer to solving the case. As the Setagaya family murder case continued to baffle the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, various theories and speculations emerged in an attempt to make sense of the senseless. The community, law enforcement, and armchair detectives alike grappled with the possible motivations behind such a brutal act. The discussion of various theories ranged from robbery to revenge and even sexual predation. Some experts suggested that the killer's actions post-murder indicated a lack of planning, which could point to robbery as an initial motive that escalated to murder. Others considered the possibility of revenge, speculating that the killer might have had a personal grudge against the Miyazawa family, although no evidence supported this theory. The case also prompted discussions about the psychology of the killer, with some suggesting that the murderer might have felt a sense of self-victimhood due to economic deprivation, which could have inspired a homicidal rage. This angle, while speculative, offered a glimpse into the potential mindset of the perpetrator. Despite the myriad of theories and the extensive evidence collected, the Setagaya family murder case remains unsolved. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police continue their investigation, seeking leads that could potentially bring closure to this tragic mystery. The police have been advised to rethink motive and opportunity, considering all angles, including those that may not seem immediately apparent. The killer's unusual DNA and the sand traced back to the vicinity of US military bases in Japan have provided some direction. Still, the true motive and identity of the killer remain elusive. As the years pass, the hope for solving the Setagaya family murder dwindles, but the determination to find the truth persists. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police remain committed to the case, and the public continues to speculate and theorize, all hoping that justice will be served for the Miyazawa family one day.